Welcome to episode 15 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is Anshel Sag. So let's get started. The first topic that I'm going to handle, I'm going to have Anshel, you jump in here in the middle part of it, but lots of news around T-Mobile this week. They announced earnings. No surprise, they continue to build momentum. They reported that both their pre and post-paid subscriber additions, in addition to a very low churn, returned one of the best performances in the company's history. And they now claim they have close to 100 million subscribers, which places them at the number 2 slot, surpassing AT&T. Any thoughts there before we jump into the standalone announcement?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, a lot of people were kind of questioning whether or not T-Mobile would be able to hold on to Sprint customers as they, got this acquisition through. And I think that's a key component of this, because if they lost a lot of Sprint customers, they wouldn't have been able to do this. And I mean, the whole point of the merger was to acquire spectrum and build scale. And I think that they're proving that they're able to do both.
Yeah, I agree. And, and also this week, earlier in the week, they made an announcement where they laid claim to deploying the world's first standalone 5G network. So for those of you that aren't familiar with what standalone is, today, in most deployments, we're in a non-standalone mode where the core is LTE in the network, and those radio base stations, the radio access network, is being upgraded to 5G. With standalone, you've got 5G core and you've got 5G RAN. So Anshel, you wrote an article this week about that. I had a little bit of input into it, as well as Patrick, our principal. Why don't you spend a little bit of time on what you felt were the big highlights there?
So I think, if you ever want to take a full read, it's on Forbes. But the quick takeaways are that because T-Mobile's 5G network is fundamentally a multi-tier, multi-layer 5G network, and because it's built on 600 megahertz as a coverage layer, as they transition to SA, they become much less dependent on the 4G LTE infrastructure, and they no longer need to use 4G for upload. They don't need to be connected to 4G at all in some scenarios, and as a result, they were actually able to improve coverage by 30%. And they were able to add an additional 2,000 cities that they previously did not have as coverage in their nationwide 250 million pop coverage area. And 250 million pop is 250 million people that are potentially covered by their service. And they also were able to show a 40% reduction in latency, which is ultimately the most important part of this, because the latency improvement is what massively differentiates 5G from 4G, because you have a much shorter time to process data. You have a much quicker connection. So, the way things load happens much more quickly, and you give yourself more time to do edge compute or, do processing on the cloud. And by having lower latency, you give yourself more time to do other things, which is ultimately why 5G is such a big deal to so many different people.
Right. And I think some people have been disappointed with some of the initial deployments. Again, that's non-standalone. And so to your point, latency is a real killer when it comes to 5G, sub 5 millisecond. And SA networks are going to deliver on that promise. So it'll be interesting to see how this rolls out with T-Mobile. On the T-Mobile front, we have a third piece of news to share. We are happy to be inviting John Saw, who is the former CTO of Sprint, now part of Neville Ray's team at the new T-Mobile, on our podcast. So it'll be our first, what we call our standalone edition podcast. That'll
Great
be on
timing,
Friday.
if I say so myself.
Right, Friday, August 21st, he'll be on. So stay tuned, but we're excited to have John on.
It's almost like we waited for this first standalone network to roll out to do this.
Exactly. Timing's perfect. I love it. Well, let's jump into your first topic, Anshel, and you've got some information to share about the South Korean market.
Yeah, so I like to be the international guy,
Yes.
even though you and I both travel internationally about the same. But the Korean guys, their government basically did a survey to kind of assess where they're at in terms of speeds. So they took the three major carriers, which are SK Telecom, Korean Telecom or KT, and LGU Plus. Who those are the three that have 5G networks in Korea right now, and they were able to see, what those speeds are like today. All three carriers are actually running sub-6 um, networks, so not even running millimeter wave. And the average download speeds was 656 megabits per second, which is incredibly fast. But then everybody goes, yeah, but it's Korea. They already have fast internet, right? That's kind of like the meme. And the reality is it's still 4 times faster than what they had with 4G, which, as far as I know, Korea had the fastest 4G networks in the world. So if they're able to get, 4 times faster, better speeds over 5G, that's already a huge improvement.
Yeah.
And that's without millimeter wave, and that's without SA. So I have a strong feeling that as things mature, obviously, there's going to be more users on the network, so it might bog it down a bit. But I think as networks mature, they start implementing millimeter wave and they deploy SA, we'll probably start seeing speeds much closer to a gig.
Right. Yeah, I know it's exciting. And, SK Telecom announced earnings this week as well. Very, very strong. I've been very bullish on that carrier. I think they're one of the leaders with respect to leaning into service offerings. It's been mainly around consumer with esports and gaming and that sort of thing.
The funny thing is,
access. Yeah.
the funny thing is, they led on the speeds. So I also went deeper and looked at the speeds per each carrier.
Yeah.
And the Korean carriers are very competitive with one another. SKT got 788 megabits per second, KT got 652, and LGU Plus got 528. So there's a pretty big disparity between the three of them, about 100 megabits each time you go down to the next carrier. So the average on one carrier, which is SKT, is actually 788, which is pretty good. But because they're looking at the average across all three, it's a little bit lower at 656.
Yeah. Still impressive. So
very impressive.
We'll keep our eyes on that market. They're certainly a leader. Let's move to my second topic this week. And this week, Intel and VMware had an announcement around a vRAN initiative. And suffice it to say, VMware, they probably invented virtualization, right? And so this is big. And what the two companies are committing to is building out the ecosystem and then promoting both the Intel FlexRAN software reference as well as VMware's RAN Intelligent Controller, or RIC, to enable the development of innovative services. It's leveraging AI, ML, the edge, you name it. So, from my perspective, anything within the RAN area where you can virtualize it has disruptive qualities to it, from reducing CapEx,
right,
and also making it easier to manage, so that you also see some benefit on the OpEx side. So, and I've been talking and writing about Open RAN as well, and sort of vRAN and Open RAN sort of fit hand in glove. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts around this announcement?
I think you made a good point that VMware are kind of the experts in virtualization.
Yeah.
And obviously they're probably weren't the leaders or the beginning of vRAN itself, but they've virtualized everything. If it's a machine that can be virtualized, and they do it. And Intel is obviously a good partner for them because one, Intel does a lot of the network transformation stuff that exists today, and they're helping to power a lot of the vRAN and the core and pretty much every component of the network at this point, except for the RAN itself. And it makes sense. I'm kind of curious to see how this spreads out further, as opposed to just being one component of the network. Because I think they can actually work together in more places than just vRAN.
Yeah, no, I agree. They're two huge tech companies that are shaping the industry. So it'll be exciting to see how things move forward there. Let's shift to your second topic. And it seems Dish is really serious about building out a wireless network. There was an announcement this week.
Yeah, so they went out and bought Ting Wireless, which is kind of a a low cost operator. But what makes it interesting is that uh, they just finished their acquisition of Boost
Mhm.
as a result of
T-Mobile Sprint.
the
Yeah.
spin-off of what was left of Sprint and T-Mobile. And what's interesting about that is they didn't really need Ting. It wasn't an acquisition that was, just enough to meet the requirements that they need to roll out a network.
Hmm.
This seems to indicate that they're actually quite interested in being competitive and
Hmm.
having a real subscriber base, and building something that is going to be truly competitive uh, with the existing market, maybe in
Yeah.
a different manner. And I think it will most likely be a 5G first network. I don't think they'll even roll out 4G.
I've predicted
Um,
that as well. Yeah, it just makes sense. They would do that. And
right,
they would use a lot of virtualization to do that as well, right?
right. Because,
Yeah.
I think it would be very similar to what Reliance did with the Geo network, where they're like, we don't, why should we care about legacy? Let's
Yeah.
just build the most efficient, cost-effective network we can, and we can charge a lot less for it because of that, because we're not spending a lot of money trying to upkeep old infrastructure because we
Yeah.
have to. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see. I think it's going to absolutely be a low-cost play, and I
Yeah.
think they're going to try and offer the lowest cost 5G service possible, and that's why Tang makes sense
Yeah.
because that feels very right fit for what they may, or what they're probably going to try to do.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna, and I think it's, I'm not entirely 100% convinced yet that they're trying to build a competitor that's going to be competitive with T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon, but I do think that they're going to create a network that's competitive enough that someone's going to buy it from them.
Huh. That's interesting. I've got a couple observations. I mean, number one, Dish's core business. I mean, that is eroding. When you look at what's happening with the cable providers,
Oh yeah,
it's just
the
it's
cord
been
cutting is unreal.
it's unreal. And and the streaming services like the Netflixes of the world that are delivering original programming, are the OTTs are taking over, and so there's a lot of churn there. And so if Dish wants to remain relevant, it's got to reinvent itself. And getting into wireless is one way to do that. You have an interesting theory there, but I believe that they are definitely serious about this. I think the acquisition in Ting gives them some operator DNA that
Mhm.
maybe was missing. Although I know that they've hired quite a few people from the industry, from the operator side as well as from the infrastructure side. But I think it's just
Right.
going to kind of deepen their acumen so that they are serious. And I agree with you. It's not realistic that they're going to go head to head with the new T-Mobile or AT&T and Verizon. I expect that they will carve out some niches for themselves, both in consumer and hey, I think there's some opportunities for them to carve out some niches in enterprise as well, possibly with
Well,
IoT.
I
So it'll be
think
interesting to
an
see.
interesting angle would actually be low cost business,
Yeah,
which doesn't exist. It's not a thing.
right.
And think about like all of the small one person businesses that are out there that would absolutely love the idea of a low cost business service.
Yeah, yeah,
I think it's a vastly untapped market because
yeah.
most business services are more expensive than consumer. And okay, let's say you offer a business service, but what if you offer a marginally higher cost than a low cost consumer service? Because right
Hmm.
now, most small business owners are just running off a consumer service
They are.
because it's
Yeah,
cheaper.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree that when you look at the leaders, historically have been, AT&T and Verizon in enterprise. You're right. It's not at that small to mid market. It's at that higher enterprise level. It's repackaging SD-WAN
Right.
and
And
other and other things. Yeah.
And most of that bottom end of the market is just they just seed to consumer and assume most of it would just
Yeah.
be a consumer play.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I think we both got some great insight there. Time will tell. I'm hoping that I can speak to the Dish team in the near term. So
Hmm.
once I do, I'll share that on a future podcast. Let's shift to my third topic this week and another announcement from Amazon Web Services and Verizon. So I continue to be impressed with AWS and their push into telco. Wavelength was something that I covered at reInvent late last year. I believe it was December. Wrote a Forbes article on it. It's online if you want to check out the Forbes page, with more insights and strategy. But what AWS realizes is that all of this has to work together. I mean, the cloud with the edge of the network, down to the core of the network. And so what Wavelength does, I kind of call it, it supercharges the opportunity with 5G, puts compute and storage resources at the network edge to reduce latency and improve overall performance. And so Verizon announced that they're launching Wavelength in 2 markets, Boston and the Bay Area. And I've spoken with executives. They've told me that they have several public use cases, but over 60 have been in pilot with customers that weren't disclosed to me. Just they said 60 large customers from a variety of different verticals. So this is real.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. Your thoughts, Anshel?
Well, I mean, it makes sense to launch in the Bay Area, right? Because that's going to be where most of the software development talent and infrastructure is to develop these use cases. So it makes sense that they would launch in the Bay Area first, because it basically gives everybody a live test bed and a good way to prove their networks out. I still feel like Amazon could be doing a better job of communicating wavelengths to a broader community. Because it still feels like it's very narrowly focused on who works in the operator industry. And I think for what they're trying to do, they need to be more broadly communicative about what it is and how it works and who should be using it. Because I don't see much about it outside of talking to you and doing my own research. And I feel like they should be more engaging with that as 5G starts to grow and edge compute starts to become more relevant. That's kind of my perspective.
No, I think it's accurate. We take it for granted because we live and breathe this stuff every day, right? But I would agree with you. I wrote that article, in an attempt to educate the market. And other than a few little press releases here and there, I haven't seen a lot of momentum. And I expect, I'm impressed. I was briefed recently by the AWS team. There was a telco symposium on, virtual that I participated in, and several executives presented, and their bench strength is incredible. They've got executives from operators. They've got executives. I think one executive from Ericsson, one from a major global operator, and so they've got the right bench strength. I think they're probably getting their sea legs, figuring out the best way to go market this. It's not necessarily an Intel Inside campaign, but I agree with you. There's opportunities to raise the visibility, and hey, we're doing that on our podcast this week, so good for us, right? So let's shift to your third topic this week. And I'm always jealous of you and Patrick, because you get invited to these Samsung Unpacked events, and you would go, physically often to the Bay Area and come back with lots of cool toys and prizes. But with the virtual event this year, why don't you share your experience?
Well, I would say it was a bit weird in the sense that they did it from Korea this year, which they usually don't do. Usually these events.
Do one in the U.S. and one in Korea?
No, usually what they do is they do one in New York or San Francisco.
Okay.
And then they do one in like Barcelona. Okay. But lately it's just been like San Francisco and New York. Yeah. So New York is like easy for everybody in Europe to access. San Francisco is easy for everybody in Asia to access. And basically this year's launch event was, a whole host of new devices, new watch, new earbuds, the Watch 3, Galaxy Buds Live. Samsung finally has noise canceling headphones for their earbuds. But the big announcement was really the Note 20. And Note 20 has 2 versions. It's the Note 20 and the Note 20 Ultra. And both versions of the Note 20 actually have millimeter wave built in. So all versions of the Note 20 are 5G, at least in the US. It seems like there might be some 4G LTE versions, because there was a thing on Samsung's website that I noted where it said 5G version is 2 grams heavier. So I think there might be some 4G versions still around, but
Yeah.
most will be 5G. And both will have millimeter wave, which is a big deal because it's a flagship phone.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the Galaxy Z Fold, which is the new foldable, the Galaxy Z Fold 2. So they came out the Fold last year, which is what I've got here. This is the old one, and then they came out with a new version, basically fixed everything that was wrong with the first one. Bigger screens, thinner, lighter, faster, nicer cameras, all the things you'd want. Also 5G by default. When the Fold first launched, it was only 5G in Korea. So that's also a new 5G device. And then on top of that, the new Galaxy Galaxy Tab S7 comes in a 4G and a 5G and a Wi-Fi version, but there is a 5G version of it. So they launched effectively 4 new 5G devices at Galaxy Unpacked, which is kind of a reiteration of something that I had published last year, that Samsung is leading on 5G, and they're basically the ones that are introducing new devices, new form factors. I think it may be one of the first 5G tablets. I don't think it is the first. But it's just interesting because they're constantly innovating, and it's the first it's the second foldable phone, or it's actually their third foldable phone, because they also have the Galaxy Z Flip. So what's funny is the Z Flip also was not originally a 5G device, and then they relaunched the 5G version of it like a week before this event. So I think they just ran out of room for all the announcements.
That's a lot of stuff.
They launched the 5G Z Flip like a week before they announced all the other 5G devices. So in a span of a week, they basically announced 4 or 5 5G devices, which is pretty impressive.
That's super impressive, and let's not forget Samsung Networks. Before the deployment of 5G, they were relatively focused on the South Korean market from an infrastructure perspective, and that's all changed now. I mean, lots of wins with Verizon and other operators around the world.
U.S. Cellular.
U.S. Cellular, for rural, they're very focused on rural, obviously, as the new number 4 now. I mean, I continue to be impressed with Samsung as well, just bringing high quality from an end device perspective as well as from the infrastructure. So that was a great recap. If you're tuning in, I'd love one of those fold devices. 5G would be preferred. I'll send you my address. So anyway, hey Anshel, another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for listening. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide us with insight on a specific 5G topic they'd like for us to cover in a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech. I'm at Anshel, and we hope that you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next time.